Hello Internet, my name is Mike Usrey, and in this episode of FM Live, I'm going to be doing a tutorial on rebuilding NC rear brake calipers. I've already talked about NA and B rear brake calipers and how to rebuild those in a previous video. We'll actually put a link to that in the description, so if that applies to you, we'll have it handy already. But the NC rear brake caliper is a little different. It does the same kind of function, of course, but it is a little bit differently built. It has different components and a little bit different process to rebuild it. So we're going to be covering this. I'm mostly going to be working with my hands, talking through it throughout the video. But if you do have questions about anything along the way, put those in the comments because we will stop and try to answer comments and questions along the way as much as possible. I will also mention that, of course, this is in vertical format right now, but we will be having this released in the future on YouTube as a 4K widescreen, probably tomorrow or the following day. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump into it. We're going to start by talking about what you need to rebuild your calipers. So, of course, you're going to start with a caliper. This is an NC rear brake caliper. So here in North America, that's a 2006 through 15 rear caliper. They're all going to look like this. There aren't any other options that you have to be aware of, like the NAs and NBs. The first two generations, there's actually 3 different slightly variants of the rear brake caliper that you could have. All NC brake calipers, the rears are going to look like this. So easy peasy there. We also are going to need some tools. So here in front of us, I've got some tools laid out, so that way we are ready to go ahead and get started. Just to kind of break down for some basic stuff, I have an impact gun, some sockets. I have a mallet, I have a 3/8 drive that also works with these sockets. I have some safety gear, gloves, safety squints. I have some brushes. These calipers oftentimes, of course, if you drive your car, they're dirty, so we want to have some way to wipe them off, clean them off. Along with that, some paper towels, whoop, some brake clean. Don't throw your brake clean. Besides that, we also are going to need a few other basic tools like some pliers, some picks of various points. I also have a very specific set of, these are C-clamp or C-clip pliers, rather. These ones are a 90-degree kind of deep angle or deep nose. I'm not sure what you call that necessarily, but these are about, 2.5, 3 inch long, and you will need to have a deeper set of these style 90-degree C-clip pliers. Besides that, it is helpful to have a parking brake caliper piston release tool. I'm not sure exactly what you call this guy, but basically this is a little tool that has a lot of different little bumps and dots and features on it. And we'll talk more about it in a little bit, but essentially it interfaces with your piston. We'll show you more in just a little bit. All right, I also have some absorbing. I've heard it called pig mat, I've heard it called a few other things, but basically you're probably going to make a mess. So go ahead and lay out some paper towels or something to be able to catch a lot of the brake fluid, because you will make at least a little bit of a mess as you're doing this, because there is going to be some brake fluid inside the caliper. Obviously, I've got it here on the table. We're not going to cover how to remove it from the car. It's pretty simple. You've got a couple of bolts and a brake line. I've also pulled the pads out of that. So basically at this point, we're ready to start breaking the caliper down and getting it into its individual components and bits and pieces. So to get started, I'm going to put my safety squints on here and my gloves. Brake fluid is something that does wash off your skin okay, but it is also not great for your skin. And then also, I'm going to look a little bit silly because I'm going to be wearing a GoPro. Actually, before I talk about getting started here, let's talk about the rebuild components. I should probably do that. So for the rebuild components of the caliper, we're going to be using a friend kit. This is actually a brand that Flyin Miata carries. We have rebuild kits for all Miatas basically up to 2015 at the moment. So these are a rear-specific kit for the 3rd generation NC Miata. We also have them for NAs and NBs, front and rear. This kit is specific to the NC, and it's mostly about the parking brake mechanism. And again, we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But we have a replacement piston, we have some seals and gaskets, We have some slider bolts and actual caliper attachment bolts, a bleed screw. There's actually 3 bleed screws in with this kit. You can ignore the 2 big ones. They're actually for a different application that uses the same rebuild kit that Friend Kit provides. And then also a couple of grease packets. And we've got 2 colors of grease packets here. They are different. Basically, the red stuff is for rubber specifically. And then we've got this stuff. I think it actually says on the packet, if I recall. Yeah, so this stuff, it does say, it's on the back in small writing, but it's for the grease pins, or the slide pins. That's these guys. So red stuff for all the rubber components whenever we need to lube that up, and then the white is for the slide pins. Okay, now without further ado, let's go ahead and get geared up. This way we can have some edits over the top showing how the caliper is actually being worked on from multiple angles. And hopefully, is it going? Hey, okay, heard the beep. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm gonna begin by getting rid of all of the extra stuff, brackets and that kind of thing that's on the caliper. So I do have the bolts that actually attach the caliper to the knuckle, the upright. So these guys, they come out pretty easily. Of course, I've just got them stuck in here, but you probably will already have them removed. If you're going to be painting the caliper as part of this process, there are these little kind of metal plates. I'm not sure exactly what they're to do other than maybe shim slightly the caliper bracket, but you can remove them just with a little pick or a small screwdriver. You just have to find a place to get underneath them and gently pry. There we go. So just like that, they come off pretty easy. And flipping this around this way, our bleeder, this guy is a 8mm. So I'm just going to zap it off with my impact. Okay, there's that. And now our brake line itself, if you haven't already removed that, should be a 14mm. And it's just a banjo bolt. There will be some crush washers in here, so don't lose those if you need to reuse them. Of course, now is also a good time to upgrade to a stainless steel brake line kit if you haven't already, because you will have removed your original factory one if that's what you're working with. On this side, we have this bracket that's for the parking brake cable. And you don't necessarily have to remove it, but I'm going to remove it here just because it'll make things a little bit easier. And this should be also a 14, I believe. Yep. All right. So that guy comes off pretty easy. Okay, now we're just left with mostly the caliper body and the mounting bracket, the slide. And at this point, we can go ahead and get the slide off of here. That'll make our lives a little bit easier going forward. And these should be 12mm bolts. There we go. Okay, these are going to be replaced. They actually have new ones in the kit, so you don't need to hold on to these, but you might as well. Now we have 2 separate pieces, the main caliper body and the mounting bracket, or the slide bracket. So these guys, I go ahead and clean this up as well, just because oftentimes you can reuse these little pad slides. They're actually really dirty on this caliper, which is good, because you can see how just yucky dark they get, but they actually are a polished spring steel material, so they do usually clean up pretty well. If yours happen to be broken or bent or something like that, you can get replacements for just these. It's usually pretty inexpensive for most online like auto parts store if you can't get them in person, but they are not included as part of the Friend Kit rebuild kit, generally because you can reuse them, and that's just fine. All right, so setting those aside, the only thing that's left now is we have our slides and our accordion seals. So these guys, is how the caliper actually moves and squeezes the pads against the rotor. And I'm just going to hold on to the seal and pull out the slide portion. These guys actually moved pretty easily for what they are. Yours might be pretty stiff, so if you need to, put a wrench on this and kind of spin it back and forth a little bit to try to free it up. They do have grease. You can see this has got some pretty dark grease on here. Sometimes it'll be really gritty, and if it is, this is a good opportunity to clean it up. The other thing I will make note of here is that on this one, once I wipe the grease off a little bit, you can see there's actually a flat, or there's a few flats on this slide. Usually do it in 3. There we go. Hopefully, as I'm spinning it, you can kind of see a little bit of the flats that I'm mentioning here. These guys, they do allow grease to move back and forth up and down the slider a little bit, but it is very common on most vehicles that you'll have one that has flats, and then one of them will have completely round surfaces. So this one has no flats on it. Now, if you ask your manufacturer, Mazda or Ford or whomever, there is a right way and a wrong way to have these sliders in which orientation. I've heard it both ways, that it's better to have one of them on the leading side of the rotation of your rotors or one on the trailing side. In my experience, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference. If you can feel the difference between having which one where, kudos to you. You're a better, more in tune driver than I am. They do that because, or supposedly because, having a little bit of grease or having a different profile helps to prevent it from having kind of a shuddering effect when you apply the brakes. Again, I've not actually felt that, having swapped them unknowingly and then discovered later that it was different left to right. But it's a good idea, if you are paying attention, to go ahead and keep them in the same orientation from which you pull them out of the sprocket. The little accordion boots, they just pop right out. We won't reuse these. And then on the inside of these cavities where the slides were, there's going to be a ton of grease in there. So this is a good time to use your brake clean and your Q-tips and clean them out a little bit. So I'm not going to do a super thorough job, but using a Q-tip or something like this, you can really get down in there and get all the old grease out, because we will be using new grease to put everything back together. Okay, so case in point, lots of yuck in there. And you might need more than one Q-tip per side. It just kind of depends on how greasy yours are. All right. Okay, so we'll put this aside for now, keeping them in somewhat of a good order to remember which slide goes in which position. There we go. Okay, so now on to the main event. We are going to talk about the main caliper body now. So the main reason why we're doing this video to showcase the NC caliper is because it does have a different parking brake mechanism, and it does have a different piston design because of it. So unlike the NAs and NBs, the first two generations, where you can use a little bit of compressed air to push this piston out and basically just get it out of the way, this actually needs to be threaded like a bolt. So to be able to remove it, I'm going to use that crazy little tool, this little square cube guy. It does have lots of features, and on the on the NC caliper, it's a simple crosshatch design, so you could use pretty much any of these sides and make it work. They just fit into one of the slots, and that's how it is able to key in. On this particular style, if you have a 4-tooth side of it, I think that works better because it does help to keep it from sliding off one way or the other, versus the sides that just have like 2 little pins. You can actually get it to slide and come misaligned. It's not a big deal. But you take this guy, and then this is where your 3/8 drive extension and ratchet comes in. But I'm going to twist it counterclockwise, just like you're unthreading a bolt. And you can see the dust boot here is starting to come up as well. That's okay. And it should get to the point where the piston is pretty wobbly. There we go. And that is more or less out. You will need to kind of wiggle it a little bit gently to remove it, and that's it. It's out of there. Now, you don't necessarily need one of these tools. I will mention that it's easily possible to get away with just using a wide, flat, big screwdriver or scraper. You can use that to twist it, turn it. Another thing that I found was actually very easy and handy is if you have just a regular size file or rasp, as long as it has a decently square edge. If you need to get some good grip on it to be able to turn it, this actually works really well. But now that the piston is out of the way, we can kind of see down in there and see a little bit more of the guts of the caliper. I'm going to pull out the boot. This won't be reused. And then kind of clean it up a little bit here. You can see we've got some guts on the inside now that it's time to remove. And this piece, you may or may not be able to see it on camera. Let me see if I can try to get a little bit where if you look down at the very bottom, there is a C-clip that holds the internals right now that we can kind of see poking out, the threaded internal shaft in place. We'll try to get some good B-roll, so my apologies if it's difficult to see live. But now we need to get that C-clip out of there to be able to remove more of the internals. So this is where this kind of long-nosed pliers that are the squeeze type C-clip pliers are going to come into play. And I'll try to get this out relatively quickly so you can see what it looks like in the daylight. Yeah, now I've jinxed myself. And if you don't have these pliers and you try using just picks or something like that, you will fight this for hours. These pliers, I think, were $20 or less on that South American Jungle website. They are well worth it. Once you have the technique down, of course. There we go. Okay, so here's that pesky circlip. So you can see it's a relatively big guy, but it does have small gripping holes, whatever you want to call those, I'm not sure. So you do need to have a relatively small set of circlip pliers to be able to get to that. But now that's out of the way. And on the inside here, we can actually grab the threaded shaft and pull it all out as an assembly. We'll talk more about that in a second. There are more parts there than you think, so try not to get them too mixed up. And then on the inside there, it's being really obnoxious. It's not going to come out yet. Okay, that's all right. So let's go ahead and talk about the threaded shaft while we've got it out, because I can't get the other bits out just yet. This guy is actually several components here. We have kind of this retainer basket. So this is what the circlip is pushing down on to keep everything compressed. There is a spring, and it is a reduced diameter on one side. It's a smaller diameter on the bottom towards the base of the threaded piece, and it's larger diameter at the top. Then we also have a small washer, and then probably the cutest Torrington bearing I think I've ever seen. Luckily, the ball bearings in this Torrington bearing are pretty well captive, so you're not likely to lose them unless you're just being really silly with it. But I didn't expect to see a Torrington bearing when I pulled this caliper apart for the first time, so that's a pretty cool thing. The rest of this is kind of a plunger, and on the back side of the threaded rod, we do have a gasket or a seal, and hopefully you can kind of see it a little bit there. It does have a wider flanged base closer to this divider piece than it does to the far end here, and that is important. Okay, so that's the order of all of those bits. I think actually let's stop messing with that in there for now, and let's jump back here to the mechanism that actually controls the parking brake. So we have this big spring here. It moves this kind of funky shaped bracket beneath it, and it's held in place by this nut. So in order to get the shaft portion of this out, we need to first remove the spring. I'm going to use some regular pliers, needle nose pliers, to be able to do this. And basically, I like to kind of just grab onto the wire and then twist and pry a little bit. It doesn't take a whole bunch of effort, but once you have that off there, you can wiggle off the spring. And then this nut comes off with a 17 millimeter. Watch your fingers. Okay. One thing I should have noted before I whipped that off there is that it's often that this is going to be just chock full of dirt and debris and just really crusty. Check that before you do, because if it is, and you try to use your impact to knock it off like I just did, and you get a whole bunch of grit built up in the threads, you may actually strip this nut or the shaft. So do as I say, not as I do in this instance. Make sure it's cleaned out. Use your picks, use your brushes, whatever you need to be able to make sure that's clean. This caliper wasn't in terrible condition, so I got away with it. I was lucky. But that nut and that, it's got a split lock washer underneath it. Those come off. And then this bracket comes off. It's a real goofy shaped bracket. The easiest way I remember how this goes back on is that I think of this like a dinosaur, where it's got his big long neck and his head over here, and his tail and his little feet. And the way that he goes on here is that he's always wanting to look at where the action's happening over here at the front of the caliper. So that's at least my trick to remembering how he stays on there. But now he comes off and then exposes the shaft that's underneath here. So this guy there, now that I've removed that, actually the other bits are going to fall out. So you may need to use a mallet sometimes, but there's actually more guts here that now I've knocked it loose, that you just need to be careful pulling it out, catching it, where you have kind of a plunger base, and then you have this little pill. So these little funky shaped guys, there we go, right here. And these are just deep down in there, and they interface with the shaft, which I'll show you how that works. I'm going to put the pill right there. That little guy will run off in a hurry, so make sure you keep track of him. Okay, so now here's the pivot shaft. This guy pulls out pretty easily now that there's nothing else in the way holding it in place. It has this little pocket, and this little pocket is actually where the pill lives, so that way when you turn that shaft, because you pull the cable, it's pushing that pill up, and it's moving the piston forward just a little bit. There's not a whole bunch of movement there, but this is the actual movement for how it works. It's just 40 degrees, 35 degrees. It's not a whole bunch of range of rotational movement. But that guy's out. And then lastly, we have the seal for that pivot shaft. Now I'm going to use a little pick to just carefully pry that guy out of there. All right. And we won't be reusing that either. Okay, so now we've got this fully torn apart. This is a bare caliper body. The only thing I haven't actually removed is this little splined stub here that holds on to the end of the spring. You don't have to remove it. I'd recommend that unless you're feeling really brave, just leave it as it is. This is as far as you really want to tear down the caliper. But from here, Now we can clean it up, make sure all the surfaces are free of debris and they don't have any kind of crud or anything hiding in any of the crevices. So spend a little bit extra time getting this nice and cleaned up before you put everything back together. This is where having a good amount of brake clean and rags and brushes and stuff like that comes in handy. Oh, you know what? I actually missed one part. So this is probably the actual last step here. There is a O-ring, a square cut O-ring, that hopefully you can see right here. And this is the seal for the piston itself. So carefully get a little pick there beside and beneath it, and then it just comes right out. Okay, so that's the actual last piece right there. And again, we won't be reusing that because the new kit includes a new square cut O-ring. As I'm cleaning this up, do we have any comments or questions I should address?
We'll save some for the end.
Got some for the end? Okay, gotcha. I will say that because these calipers are actually cast aluminum, I would go easy with any kind of hard or metal bristle brush. If you use this at all, I would say only use it on the outside. Don't use it on the inside because you might actually scratch some of the cylinder bore of the piston and cause it to have issues leaking. So anything on the inside where there's moving parts, I'd use a soft bristle brush or some kind of other less prone to making big damage method to clean these guys out. Usually the stuff on the inside isn't going to be too terrible because it's not usually been subjected to a bunch of dirt and grime and stuff like that like the outside does. Okay. And don't forget that you do have kind of some little chambers down here at the very bottom where the pivot shaft connects to the main cylinder or main cavity of the caliper body. So make sure that's all cleaned up. All right. I think we're looking pretty good. So the other thing that I like to do is check all of the seating surfaces for any of these gaskets or seals. They're going to have kind of an edge that gets tucked into underneath the top portion or the surface level of the caliper to make sure it stays in place. So sometimes you'll find some dirt and debris built up in there. I like to use a little pick just to gently follow the corners and make sure that they are not hiding any yucks.
That was probably the worst sound ever. I didn't like that scraping sound.
Yeah? Well, sorry. Nails on chalkboard, eh? And lastly, I'm going to inspect the inlet for where the brake line feeds into the caliper. Just make sure that that looks clean and clear. Use a flashlight, shine down in there. If you've got a little inspection light, a pen light, those work great. These look okay. They shouldn't have too much crud down in the threads because, you know, normally you've got stuff threaded in there. But just giving them a once over to make sure everything looks okay before we start putting anything together. And I'm also going to get a fresh paper towel to kind of give a final wipe down of the internals just to make sure that everything is clean and clear. Any kind of little piece of dirt or debris that gets stuck between the piston and the caliper wall is going to just scrape up and down. So, you might be running out of video there for the top view, sorry. Actually, I guess, do you mind if I just take it off then, if that's the case? Yeah. Oh, much better. Okay. Not as important quite as cleaning up an engine, but kind of a similar philosophy of dirt and debris becomes abrasive and will just tear up the internal components if they get pushed around and scraped up against each other. So make sure everything is nice and clean. Okay. All right, that is good enough for Hollywood at the moment. So let's go ahead and start the reassembly. On these guys, I'm going to basically work in reverse of how we disassembled it. So being that the last thing I should have done was taking out the seal for the shaft, I'm going to get that guy installed. So these are just rubber grommets. They do install fairly easily. You just kind of get it started on one side and then push and manipulate it until it's seated nice and evenly. You can kind of give it a little bit of a smush and push it around to make sure that it's in there properly. So that's looking pretty good. And now we're going to go to the pivot shaft itself, which is a little grungy. So let's go ahead and clean that guy off. And there will be some grease down in that little pocket. Okay. So on these guys, we do want to have a little bit of grease down in here because it will help hold that little pill in place when we start putting the parts together. So I'm going to use some generic grease because this is just for a video and we're actually not going to put this caliper back into service just yet. If you are doing this at home, you should be using the just a little dab of the red grease, because basically this is going to be the same surfaces that are touching some of the rubber here on the inside of the caliper. So use a little dab of the red stuff. But basically this is just going to make our lives easier, having a little bit of grease to hold that pill in place. All right, and then because this is also going to be turning and moving, I'm going to add a little thin layer of grease all the way around, so that way as I slide it into this bore, it'll go in easier and it will spin easily. There we go. So that went in by hand. You do have to kind of give it a little bit of wiggle, no problem. The other thing now is that now that it's in there, let's see, there we go. I need to rotate this pin up top here to the point where I can actually see the pocket when I look down into the caliper. Hopefully you can see it moving around as I twist the pivot a little bit there. Yeah, sorry, it's kind of difficult. Light is difficult to get down in little bitty tight spaces like that. Okay, so we've got that guy in place. We're looking good there. Now let's go ahead and try to get the little pill and the next little plunger base cleaned up. I say pill, it's really just, it's a push rod, but it is shaped like a little black pill. And all its job is to do is to go between this plunger base and this pivot and be able to make a twisting motion into a linear motion. Okay, I've got this guy cleaned up now a bit. Before we actually put this back in, we do need to replace an O-ring. So carefully use a pick or similar, and you can pull that O-ring up and off. And we're not going to reuse that because we have a new one with the kit. This is just a round O-ring. There's only one that's this size in the kit. So we've got that guy installed. I'm also now going to put a little bit of grease here in the top. And this is, again, would be the red grease in the packet, but I'm using this generic stuff. I'm also going to put a little bit of grease here on the O-ring itself. And then the whole reason why we're putting some grease in there, or most of the reason, is because now when I put the pill in there, it kind of holds itself in place. Okay, so this I'm going to set aside. We'll come back to that in just a second. Now we turn our attention to the threaded shaft. So we can wipe this guy down, get it cleaned off, and then we will need to replace that funny flared gasket that's on the bottom. So again, take note that the flared side, right here, is larger diameter than the side that's closer to the back of this threaded shaft. So carefully get that guy pulled up. Don't stab your fingers. There we go. So there's that guy. He's not going to be reused. Grab the new gasket. Again, putting the larger flared side towards the metal base. And gently stretch that into position. Oof. This is easier when you don't have slippery glove fingers. There we go. Okay, and this is pretty common. See how I've got it on there, and it's kind of all twisted up. So you will need to probably do a little bit of finessing once you get it onto the threaded shaft. So make sure that everything is seated properly to where the wide base is even all the way around. Okay, and then a little bit more of the red grease to lubricate that guy. All right, so now these two pieces, I like to do it, you can just do this one by itself, but I like to actually use this as kind of a guide. So this just fits straight into there, whoops, and it will probably pop out the little pill because there is a small hole in the bottom of that, so it will use air pressure and push it out sometimes. But now I have a little bit better holding mechanism to be able to put this back into the caliper. So on this plunger base, you can see there are two dowels on either side, 180 degrees apart, and you might hopefully be able to see that there are two drilled holes down inside the caliper. So there is an orientation where these posts are going to sit and slot in properly. So that is an important thing to be able to rotate it, and having it here on the threaded rod will just make it a little bit easier to move it around and get it positioned properly. So last check, looking down in there, making sure that I can see the pocket, and then this is kind of a bit of a game of braille here, where I'm going to push it and rotate it a little bit and see if I can actually get it. There we go. That was much easier than I was anticipating happening on camera. I'm glad you filmed that, Logan. So now I twisted a little bit. There does come a point where once you can feel those posts kind of engage the holes, you do need to give it a little bit of a shove, and it will kind of click into space, into that position, and then you'll know now it won't really turn. It's feeling pretty solid. And the other thing you can do, now that we've got that in there, and hopefully you'll be able to see this, is I'm going to take my little dinosaur friend, and I'm just going to temporarily put him on the shaft, the pivot shaft, and I can turn, there we go, I can turn him back and forth from toe to toe on that post. And it's probably hard to see on camera, but as I'm turning it, you can see that threaded shaft actually does move, and that's what you want. There's not a whole bunch of movement, but now I know it is seated properly, and that little pill is pushing from both sides. Okay, so dinosaur comes back off for now. We're good with those parts. Now we need to go to the rest of the, let's call it the plunger assembly here. Sure. Okay, so reverse order. We're going to start with the Torrington bearing. Make sure he is nice and cleaned off. You can add a little bit of grease if you want to, but you don't have to because this will be soaked in brake fluid once it's all put back together. So he goes on the shaft, the threaded shaft like that. Slides down. Same thing with the little washer. There we go. That's next. Oh, sorry. This flat, thin washer. Okay. That goes next. And then our conical spring. This guy goes next. And again, the short or small diameter side goes into the caliper first. The large diameter is facing the outside or facing the opening. And then we have our retainer basket, or top, whatever you want to call it here, of our plunger assembly, kind of a flower shape. So we're going to have the pedals down, if you will. That goes into the caliper like that. And that's what keeps the spring and all the rest of the assembly in place. And then finally, to actually keep it from moving around while all the parts are in motion doing the braking job, we are going to use this circlip. So here's where it's going to get a little bit difficult to see what's going on again, but I'm going to push this down in there. You can use your circlip pliers to be able to get that in place, but what I actually prefer to use anytime I'm doing this is an appropriately sized socket. So we're going to cheat a little bit here. I think this is an inch, yeah, a 1 inch socket. You could probably use inch and a 1/16 and be good as well. But essentially, I'm looking for a socket that's about the same size, but not quite as large as the circlip is itself. Because I'm going to use this to force this circlip down into position, because as I push on it, it's going to squeeze and then snap into place inside the groove. So I'm going to gently send this guy in there as much as possible, using my circlip pliers to compress it a little bit. And again, my apologies, this will be difficult to see on camera because it's difficult for me to see in person. There we go. And you may need to take a couple of attempts actually getting it in there. It is a bit difficult. There we go. Okay, so now I was able to set it down in there, and I can use my socket now to help push it in. You can kind of seat it down in there, sometimes a little bit by hand, but what I like to do is get a deep socket and need an adapter, so that way I can put a bit of an extension on it. Then I can use my mallet and comfortably smack the top of the piston, or the top of the socket here, to help seat it in place. Shouldn't need a whole bunch of force, but we need enough to be able to get it to sit down in there. Looks like I need to reposition it a little bit. There we go. Oops. I made it worse. Okay, so just like Keith's bushing video, I'm showing you real life. This isn't all Hollywood and special effects. This is one of those things where I definitely struggle a little bit. It will take probably a few attempts to get it in there. All right, I think we're pretty close. And I will warn you with this trick, it is possible to scrape up the side of the inside of your cylinder here, of the piston wall. So only do this when you have it pretty much down at the bottom and it's nearly seated, but you're just trying to get the circlip down into the groove. Don't start at the very top. You will scratch the absolute crap out of the cylinder walls. There we go. I think I felt it drop into the groove. Okay. And yep, that is in there. Okay. So now that we've got that guy finally in there, now we can worry about putting in the new O-ring. So this is the square cut O-ring for the piston itself. It's the only one of its size. There's not much to mix up in this kit, fortunately. And use the red rubber grease to give it a little bit of help. Doesn't need a whole bunch here. We're just going to give it a little bit of lubrication. And then I'm going to push it here into the groove inside the caliper. There we go. Boop. Okay, so now that I've kind of finagled it, you can see it's there into the inner groove. This outer groove here, sorry, again with the scraping, this outer groove here is for the dust boot. So you have to go past this outer groove to get to that inner groove for the piston O-ring. All right, so that is good to go. From here, let's go ahead and let's get the piston. Let's talk about the piston a little bit. So this piston is different from the earlier versions because it has this crosshatch pattern, right? But also because of the threaded ratcheting kind of mechanism that it has here inside. On the earlier cars, these are not really serviceable. You can't really get at them, or at least most of the ones I've seen, it's kind of a assembly where bits are riveted and pushed together mechanically, so you can't really get them out to see them, to service them. On these ones, they do have a little circlip. I have the original piston from a different caliper pulled out here, and I pulled the circlip out to show you. So similar to the big guy, we've got a small circlip, a little washer with some tabs on it, and then we have a spring and a plunger. So it kind of looks like a valve spring. This one is completely cylindrical. It doesn't have a taper to it. And then this plunger at the very bottom, you can see it's got these threads. That's what mates up with the threads on the shaft here. And then kind of this interesting foot shape. So these guys, hopefully there's enough light you can kind of see down inside the piston here. These fit in the very bottom like that, but they have these grooves in them here, and then also the grooves in the piston itself in the side to allow the brake fluid to flow around all of this assembly to get to the backside of the face of the piston. So that way when you press the brake pedal, your hydraulic pressure is still going to be able to move this piston and stop the car. But this is basically sitting in here, and it's able to move a little bit because your spring will collapse or extend based on what your parking brake is doing. And it has a little bit of movement where basically it can kind of buffer your parking brake action. So it's not a whole bunch of bits here, but it is a little bit different from how the factory setup works on the NAs and NBs, and mostly just because you can actually get at the parts and look at them. These guys don't really move around a whole bunch. You probably don't even have to worry about doing anything with this, especially if you have a brand new piston. You don't need to worry about it. But I found it pretty interesting that this is how these guys work, and this allows a little bit of movement even though the whole piston can be basically moving in and out and moving up and down the threaded shaft because it has these separate components. So we don't need to reassemble this guy since this is the original one that we took out, but it is time to put the new piston in. So now for this guy, you could go ahead and get it started and use the tool to start threading it onto that threaded rod in there. But what I like to do is actually get it partially dressed, because this will make getting the dust boot into the caliper a little bit easier. So these dust boots, they have a bit of an accordion effect to them, and they will have a little bit of stretch, which is good. So I'm going to put it on the piston first. That way I can kind of stretch it here. There we go. And pull that down so that way it hangs off the back of the piston a little bit. There we go. Because this square seat or square cut edge at the very bottom needs to go into the caliper here, just like the O-ring did for the seal, and then also just like the dust cover back here for the pivot shaft. And if you have the piston already in there, it's pretty difficult to shove this in to where it actually sits. So I like to have it where it's already hanging off the piston, kind of get it into position, and then hopefully, carefully, push it into place so that way you can get the dust boot sealed and into the caliper body. You might need to use a small screwdriver or maybe these pick tools to be able to kind of get it started. There we go. So now the piston, whoops, the piston is loose, and then once I get this little last bit here pushed into place, there we go. Now I can actually start getting that piston seated. So you can see that I can kind of push it down into place, but I can't actually push it in because it has that threaded rod, remember. So from here, I'm going to use my special little tool. Just has a 3/8 drive. And I'm going to carefully start threading this caliper piston in. And you may need to apply a little bit of pressure, but this is a righty-tighty kind of situation to get it to go in. Actually, I think I can see here my dust boot. It didn't quite seat on this one side. If you see when you're spinning this and it's spinning the dust boot, see how that's kind of puckered up there a little bit? That's an indication that your dust boot probably isn't seated as well as it should be. There we go. Actually, I think just spinning it backwards pushed it into position. Maybe not. I do recommend that you stop and deal with this now before you go any further, because again, once your piston is all the way in there, it can be a little bit of a bear to get the seal to actually sit where it's supposed to. Okay. So now I've got the piston loose again. Yeah, so see how it actually had a little bit of an impression there. So I need to try that again. Just be careful, take your time. Get that lip to seal or sit inside the caliper body like it's supposed to. If you're using a pick like this, this is a little bit dancing close to the edge because you don't want to poke a hole in your dust boot either. So you might use a small flat-headed screwdriver if you got one handy, because that's a little safer than using a pointy pick. There we go. I think that's probably the winner. All right. Okay. So So now we're just carefully applying a little bit of pressure so that way I can feel it engage that threaded shaft, and you can see it is retracting into the caliper body. And then just like that, the dust seal kind of pops itself up and over into a groove on the piston itself. And that is fully retracted. So the good thing about this design is that you can't really go too far. So I am fully bottomed out here, but I can actually keep turning this, and it's not going to hurt anything. You're not going to strip anything out. There is a seal, that bottom of the plunger rod, that it is just kind of a press fit, a tight press fit into the plunger base, and that's what's turning in there right now. So normally whenever this is not bottomed out, it's tight enough to let you spin and get the caliper piston retracted. But once you have it bottomed out and there's no more thread, that's what's spinning. So you're not going to hurt anything, but there will be a point that that no longer retracts into the caliper once it's bottomed out. Okay, so main caliper is now assembled, or at least all of the moving bits inside the caliper are assembled. We can return our attention back here to the parking brake lever mechanism. So remember our dinosaur friend here. We're going to set him in position. Remember, he likes to watch the action, so have his head facing the rotor and the pads and all of that. You do have to kind of pry and push him into position a little bit. Do we have questions? Not yet? Okay. And you may need to spin it just a little bit. I'm going to try to grab the base. There we go. And just spin it a little bit to get little dinosaur friend on there and started. There we go. So it should be sitting pretty flush with that kind of machined base head of the shaft. There shouldn't be any major gap there, and maybe you can also see from here what it's supposed to look like. But now that we have that seated, we can put our split lock washer on there, and then also this guy, the big burly nut. And zip him down back into place. Again, watch your fingers. We don't need to go crazy. We're just looking to go pretty snug. Make sure that that split lock washer is compressed and it's even on both sides of the split. So that's looking fully compacted. And now we can put our spring back on. So there are two sides, kind of a short tail and then a long skinny neck here. The shorter version that's all along with the rest of the windings here, this is what's going to hook onto the post. So go ahead and get that started first. And then you can see here that the long goofy end here is on the other side of this post. So you can usually just use your pliers and kind of power it over, or actually another thing that I like to do is give it a little bit of a twist to get it over the lip here. There we go. So now we have pressure holding this in position. And then if you want, I mean, you could do this at any point once you have the piston in there too. You can actually move this lever and you can see the piston moving. That's always a good sign that things are working the way they're supposed to. All right, and now, let's see. Let's do, since we're still messing with the main bracket body here, we can put on the cable bracket. Again, this is optional. You didn't have to remove it. There's a little alignment dowel piece here at the front, faces towards the claws of the caliper. And then the other hole has threads in it, and that's where our bolt with the split lock washer goes. And this should be a 14. Okay. There we go. All good there. And then I think let's go ahead and turn our attention back to the slide now. Move some of this stuff out of the way. Okay. So remember, I've kept my slides in position where I need them to be as far as the totally smooth barrel one versus the one that has the 3 flats machined into it. If you need to do any further touch-up cleaning here, go ahead and do so. But now it's time to use the new slides that are included with the kit, as well as the little accordion boots that come with them. So again, with these boots in the slides, getting them all installed to where they fit and go into the little grooves can be a little tricky, so I usually prefer to start by getting the boots in place first. But before you do that, once you have everything cleaned out of these slide bores, I like to put a little bit of grease in there first. And this will be the white grease that is specifically for the slides, not the red stuff. So add a little bit of grease down in there. You don't have to go crazy. All right, so put a little bit of grease in there. And then now I'm going to go ahead and set the boots in place and do the same kind of process where you get one edge started and then you kind of squish and manipulate it to where it gets the other portions started. This one's a little bit easier to see in person because you can actually see the other side, so you use a small pick or a small screwdriver if you need to kind of manipulate the inside to push it into the groove, just like that. So now it's fully seated. And then same thing on this side. Get the lip seated, kind of work it around. There we go. And then make sure it is all the way in on the inside. Perfect. Okay, so now both of the boots are installed. You've got a little bit of grease preloaded in there. And then I am going to use the new caliper slide pins where they have a smooth one and a machined flat one. I'm going to keep the same positions. So totally round there, machined one here. Add a little bit more of that white grease. And then gently push these in. You can kind of give them a little bit of a twisting motion. And then once they get to this point, there's a little bit of a neck here on the shoulder that needs to go into your seal, your accordion grommet gasket seal. And it will kind of hold itself in place once you've popped it over the lip there. And then same thing here with the other one. Give it a little bit of the white grease. And then work that one into position. Okay, and you will build up a little bit of air pressure as well, especially on the one without the slides or the machine flats. That's okay. Oftentimes you just kind of need to keep working it as it's pushed in there. You'll move some grease around and then all of a sudden the air pressure will be able to shoot past the grease. But same thing here. Push it to the point where, there we go, it's kind of in there with the boot. Actually, this one never burped properly. Sometimes you have to kind of actuate it a few times. Oops, this one's actually misbehaving. It is pushing up the boot as well. So if this happens, where you can see that has come out of the housing, clean that up a little bit, then you do need to go back and fix that. You might be able to push it back in with a pick or a screwdriver if you're lucky. But don't leave it like that, because this is a good way to let dirt and grease, well, dirt in, grease out, and it will ruin your slides, and then your brakes don't work so well. I think I might get lucky here. No, I'm close, but it's just not working. So, unfortunately, that happens. Pull your slide back out, and then rework that seal. I'm going to just go ahead and wipe it all off a little bit. Sometimes having the grease in there will make it easy for it to pop out. There we go. Okay, round 2. If you got an excess of grease here on the end that builds up, go ahead and pull that off, wipe it off. You don't need to have a ton in here, it just needs to be able to move freely. There we go. Don't know if that came through on camera, but actually as soon as I pushed it in there, it kind of did a little bit of a burp. So now it's not trying to press out on its own. Okay, so that's good to go. These guys, your little pad slides, I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time on these, but they're usually pretty easy to clean up using a rag or a little brush. See, it usually wipes off pretty easily like that, or just get replacement ones. Again, they're not included with this friend kit, but they are usually readily available from most auto parts stores or online. These ones are looking pretty good. I am going to reinstall them. So these go in like thus, or basically you're emulating this U-shape opening here with the bracket. They are the same top or bottom or inside outside. It makes no difference. And they just press into place, just like that. And you'll know that they're fully seated when you can hopefully see there at the corner here where that's nice and flush on both sides. And then just repeat the process here on the other side. They kind of just snap into place, just like that. Okay, so that is more or less the assembly for our brackets back together and good to go. So now we can marry these two pieces up. And some of the last pieces included with this friend kit are the bolts. These are just nice clean bolts with some pre-applied blue thread lock. So go ahead and get your bolts lined up here. You can start them by hand. They're just threading into the back of our caliper slides. And you don't need to go crazy right now because we have everything off the car. Once you put this back on the car, you'll be removing these bolts so that way you can install the pads, get the caliper bolted on the bracket, that kind of stuff. So don't worry about getting these tight. I'm just getting them on here right now so that way it's holding everything together. All right, and the only other things we have left to do are the bleeder and the bleeder cover. So with this kit, as I mentioned, there are multiple bleeders included. There's actually 3 in this particular kit. There's 2 larger diameter ones that are really similar looking, but they're slightly different in how their barbs and like the bottom depth is, but they don't matter for us. For Miatas, they're not necessary. You just want this little guy, and this goes into this threaded port right here. So he gets threaded in. Just going to snug it up because, again, once you get these back on the car, you're going to bleed the brakes, so I'm not going to go crazy with trying to torque that bleeder in place. And then your little cap for the bleeder just pushes on just like that. Boop. And then, the only thing I didn't do on the brackets is reinstall these little shims. So they just press into place on the backside of your caliper bracket here, just like when we removed them. They just pop back into that little spot, and that's it. Your caliper is hunky-dory. This is ready to go back on the car, get your pads installed, re-hang your parking brake cable, and then bleed the brakes. Should be good to go. Obviously, you want to check everything over, make sure that you don't have any leaks from any of the points, you know, at the piston, at the bleeder, when you get your brake line reattached, that kind of thing. So due diligence there, but this is a reassembled caliper ready for more stopping power. Okay, that was a pretty long tutorial. Thank you for holding with me throughout. I will stop here and ask if there's anything I need to cover, talk about, answer questions. What do we have?
Some reputable brands sell stock replacement calipers for a little more than what a rebuild kit costs. How does a rebuild kit compare?
Oh, okay. So question is, there are companies out there that sell rebuilt calipers for not a whole bunch more than a rebuild kit. How do they compare? It's a great question. For the most part, a lot of rebuilt calipers that you find out there, they are literally Mazda or whatever brand calipers that a company will acquire. They'll take them apart, clean them up, rebuild them just like what I showed you here, and then you buy the finished assembly. So are they as good? Are they better? It's pretty comparable. It's the same basic parts. They're going to be using very similar components to the friend kit. So if you value your time more than a little bit of money or the experience of doing this job yourself, and if you don't care about painting or powder coating your caliper at the same time, that's kind of one of the ideal situations. Like I actually have painted calipers before where I take them apart that they were working fine before, but I wanted them, you know, red or whatever. So I will take them apart, paint them, and then buy the rebuild kit because I wanted a different color. So if you like the aspect of customization, or if you like to know exactly what goes through the process, it's a good thing. If you like the easy button, yeah, replacement calipers are generally just fine. So depends on which you prefer.
Our last one's not a question, but can you mention that these are TUV certified for our German friends?
Are these TUV certified? That is a great question. I was going to say, I think they are. They don't actually state on the box. Friend Kit is a Spanish company. They sell these parts in the UK and also in other parts of Europe as well. So they do have a TUV certification. They are good to go if that is something that is required of where you live. Okay, everything else good? All right, well, again, thank you for hanging in there. This was a longer video. This tutorial is something that I wanted to cover because they are a little different from the first two generations of Miata calipers, just because of the assembly that goes together. A little bit different components, does the same job. But otherwise, hopefully you learned something. If this is something that you find interesting or is helpful for your car that you're putting together or working on, let us know. Also, if you have suggestions about other things that we should talk about or other tutorials how to do, drop us some comments down below so that way maybe we'll catch those next time for a future FM Live or maybe even edited instructional video. But otherwise, thank you for watching. We really appreciate it, and we will see you next time.